Afternoon, Holly.
All right, I was just making sure that everything is live streaming now, so you are good to go. And welcome, Marcus. It looks like we have everyone present.
All right, awesome. Yes, I did get the message that we're live streaming. So with that, I will call to order here, March 10th at 3:02 p.m. It's our official start time. And Holly or Jacinta, if you will, take roll.
I can take the roll for you. We'll start with Councilmember Watts.
Here.
Mr. Eddie Gonzalez Lumiere.
Here.
Mr. Marcus Johnson. Ms. Corey Melton.
Here.
Mr. Darren Toston.
Here.
You have a quorum and all members of the work group are present and accounted for.
All right, fantastic. And we definitely appreciate everyone's presence here today. So with that, I believe that Ms. Holly McPhail sent out the agenda. So we'll briefly go over and review the agenda, and then I'll need a motion to approve it. So has everyone received a copy of the agenda?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. All right. And so, yes, so we'll have a call to order. We've done the roll call. We're going to do the approval of the agenda about governance. We're also going to open up for general public comment, requests for information responses, discuss work plan development, discuss next meeting date, next meeting agenda. We'll open up for work group member comments and then also the adjournment. So can I have a motion to approve the agenda?
This is Darren Toston. I move that we accept the agenda.
This is Eddie Gonzalez Lumiere. I second.
Awesome. Perfect. So with that, we will move on to the next topic of governance, which will discuss the purpose of this committee. So the general overview, this is a kickoff for the work group to inform the scope of work for future procurement for software solutions for the Children's Services Council of Leon County. We want to take this opportunity to get to know the members of the work group, the expertise that each of us will bring to the table. We also want to discuss and review Florida Sunshine Law. And just in case you guys are not aware, we're also going to discuss the response to the request of information, RFIs that we receive from the specific firms. And the goal today is to leave with a work plan that will guide our activities for the next 5 weeks. So with that said, we will move into introductions. And if each person can just take an opportunity to introduce yourself, what your background is, if you have any IT background, share that with us. And then just in general, what expertise, knowledge base or value, if that's a good word to use, that you'll bring to this work group. So if we want to start with Mr. Toston first.
Sure. My name is Darren Toston, graduate of Florida A&M University with a degree in computer information systems and a master's in management information systems from Nova Southeastern University. I've worked in the IT field for over 20 years in various capacities, from desktop computer support to database administration to web development. Currently, I am the data processing manager at the Department of Juvenile Justice, where I manage a number of developers and work on our juvenile justice information system.
All right, thank you so much. And I'm just going to go across my screen here. I see Mr. Eddie Gonzalez.
Yes, Eddie Gonzalez Lumiere, thank you for the opportunity. Look forward to contributing in my small way. So I'm the CEO of Ruvos, which is a Tallahassee-based healthcare technology company. We've been around for 18 years. We primarily focus on public health. So we've been pretty busy the last couple of years moving data across the nation. In addition to that, for me, some passions are obviously early childhood education, talent workforce, and talent pipeline management, things that I try to do in the community. At the end of the day, I'm also a professor at Emory's School of Public Health. basically the public health and technology pieces, how they work together. And so technology is a passion of mine, and look forward to contributing. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Mr. Marcus Johnson.
Yeah, so my name is Marcus. I'm currently serving as the Chief Information Officer for CHS, Children's Home Society of Florida. Been with CHS since July. Prior to that, I'm a 20-year Army veteran. I was an Army officer in IT, did that for 20 years. And post-retirement, I was the IT director for the Attorney General of the state of Tennessee. I was a county IT director. I ran IT operations for the entire SeaWorld organization for a number of years. And I've also dabbled in some nonprofit work in the ministry field, and have written some books. I have a DBA in IT leadership from Capella University with all but dissertation. I didn't do the dissertation. I decided not to because they just wanted my money. And my expertise is in business process improvement, IT operations management. But we within CHS are currently going through an exercise similar to what Leon County is doing. I'm in a big digital transformation project for CHS, which is very large. And so I'm kind of going through that exercise now at CHS. So I'm glad to be here and hope that I can contribute.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Mr. Johnson. And Corey Melton.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you again for letting us all be here. My name is Corey Melton. I am Vice President of Membership and Talent Development at the Greater Tallahassee Chamber of Commerce, where I've been for the past 10 years. My background started out in education. I was a school teacher and have spent most of my career in nonprofit work outside of education, and then 10 or 15 years in sales, and some of that being in software sales. So my background is less on the IT, how does it work on the back end side, but much more on the user experience, customer support, that end of it. So I look forward to helping every way I can.
Awesome. Thank you, Corey. And I think that I'm supposed to give my background. So I'm Terrence Watts. I actually work for the Department of Children and Families. Started with the department in December of 2003. So I've been around for a long time. My background has been in the investigations arena. I'm currently the Community Development Administrator for Circuit 2, so all the counties in Circuit 2. This particular area is I have a very strong interest. I know that the Children's Services Council can only be as successful as this system that we are hoping develops. And so choosing the right platform, the right group to take us to that next level is going to be major. And I mean, it's just something I'm passionate about. And so I was very excited to be a part of this particular work group. So that's me. And with that, we will go on to the next topic. So next, we're going to have a discussion about governing in the sunshine. So I'll ask Holly to take it over from there and give us some overview on how we should operate.
Thank you, everyone. I appreciate that. And I just want to first just apologize. I am not at home where I would normally be. So hopefully you can hear me okay through the mask. If you can give me just a thumbs up that it's all coming through okay. Fantastic. I appreciate that. The primary thing that we just want to remind everybody, and in your packet, you should have received on one of the pages, an overview of Florida sunshine laws. And the reason why we want to mention that to you is unlike nonprofit work, we are an actual government entity, and therefore as appointed members to a work group, even though you're not an elected official or serving on the official council, you are appointed to the work group, and therefore all of your activities are going to fall under the same sunshine law. And so I wanted to just provide that to you, mainly to make sure that you were informed about it. And so that every communication that we might have back and forth over email, maybe text message, heck, if we were connecting via Facebook Messenger, it doesn't matter what method of communication that we're using, all of those records are going to be subject to the sunshine law and therefore need to be archived, et cetera. The other thing that we just wanted just everyone to know is that it talks about when we say government in the sunshine, and the reason why we're having these meetings publicly noticed and available to the public, even though no one is currently has chosen to join us formally in the Zoom space that we're at. But it applies to when there's a gathering of any of 2 or more members of the same board to discuss some matter which will foreseeably come before that board for action. Now, that was probably a loose interpretation, considering that this particular work group will not be taking formal action, but we do want you to make recommendations to a board that will take formal action. So we wanted to just err on the side of caution and just ensure that all of the meetings that we have are open to the public, that we're giving that reasonable notice, and that we are in fact taking minutes and will be making those publicly available. In addition, we are live streaming right now. You should have seen that alert. It's going straight to our YouTube channel, so it's creating that automatic archive for us. On this overview, and this was provided actually by Ms. Pat Gleason, who presented to the full council back in September, I believe it was. So this is the exact same handout. She, of course, went into a lot more detail, but in general, we just wanted to make sure that you have this information available to you, that you understand penalties that might be involved if you were to, for whatever reason, break that, this idea of the public gathering. And then just knowing that when we get together and we talk, it is been noticed to the public. With that, are there any questions about the public records law, Florida Sunshine? I feel like I know that Mr. Watts, I'm guessing that Mr. Tostin are very familiar with this. I think that Mr. Gonzalez-Lumiere, you've served on boards before that are subject to this. Corey, I'm guessing. So looking all around, no questions? All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll turn it back over to you.
All right, sounds good, perfect. So next we will talk briefly about the quorum and some of this Ms. McPhail mentioned. So of course this is being live streamed and this meeting is open to the public. And while the committee, we are not conducting formal business, we with the CSC want this to be as transparent as possible. So we will make this Zoom link available to the members. It will be published. And also, if, for example, if we had public comment, we would, unmute so that, folks could address their comments in this setting. The one request is that if we did have comments or whatnot, that it be on topic around what we're discussing, solutions, and that we would limit those comments to a particular time in accordance with our actual CSC, Children's Services Council's public comment policy that we established a few months ago. That can also be found on the website. So any questions on that before I move on to the next? Nothing? Okay. And Holly, do we have any general public comment? No one? Okay, perfect.
No, sir. There's no one present, so no okay. Public comment. Thank you. Right.
Sounds good. Thank you. So we'll go on to the next agenda item, which is our RFI responses. Before we, and so this was also attached to the agenda that Holly sent out, the actual responses that were received. But before we go through the 4 responses, Holly, if you wouldn't mind giving a brief recap of what the RFIs included, who received the responses from, and that are published in our actual packets.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to just share the RFI. I believe each of you received a copy of the proposal that did go out into the community at some point or another, primarily because I think I said, hey, will you share it with other individuals to ensure that it got out so that we could get hopefully a robust response. It included a lot of different areas on it. I think most of you are familiar with the idea of an enterprise solution software, so I won't go into what that is and the why behind it. But we did go beyond just kind of some of the traditional grants management type work and included HR elements, included chartered account elements, as well as included the idea of case management. We wanted to kind of cover the gamut of possible opportunities that were out there to create a system. We did have a couple of meetings with various vendors to get clarification. And we did confirm that that was in the market research phase. That's perfectly acceptable. That asked the question regarding, hey, we're really, really good in these 4 areas, but maybe not this one, or we're really good in these 3 areas, but not these 2. Do you still want a response from us? And so in those opportunities, we did say, yeah, we don't necessarily know what we don't know. So we wanted to make sure that whatever we were putting out there to the public is just to get as much information as possible. In the RFI, we also talked about flexibility of timeline. We really wanted to focus on as much as we can, software as a service. We don't want to deal a lot with customization. We're a small organization, and we're not sure in terms of funding how much we're going to have consistently. So we asked those types of questions as well. So we did receive several questions and started to engage in responses. There were 5 responses that were submitted, but one of the responses was in essence a no response because they said they're not going to be providing the information. So the 4 that are in your packet are 4 that gave us as much of a response as we received. So that's why we put those in your packet in just alpha order. The other thing that I would just add that we did ask for that most of them did not include, we wanted an idea of a cost estimate. Almost every single one of them have come back and said, well, until you give us a scope of work, we can't really give you an idea of how much this is going to cost. So I will share that we have done a little bit of research with some of our other partners around our sister CSCs, if you will, around the state. And just to get an idea of the systems that they're using, what were some of those initial startup costs, what are those annual subscription fees, et cetera. And are we in the right ballpark by allocating in the current budget $150,000 to get us started? Every single one of those CSCs said absolutely, right? In some of the market research phase, when we were talking with some of the vendors about this is what we're kind of thinking and asking them for their response around prices, they've all of their estimates that they've shared with us thus far in verbal conversation only have also been under that. So I do believe that in terms of what the council in their wisdom back last May, June, when they adopted the budget, definitely included those elements to help us really develop a robust system. So with that, I think I've talked to each of you individually at some point about this process, and really want to get your feedback on each of those responses, and then kind of want to learn from you for our next steps. So if there's any specific questions about the RFI that we issued out and what we did receive response wise, I forgot, there was one other response that was a very generic, was not a customized response at all. They didn't respond to any of the elements, and they talked about on upwards of $1 million for designing a program like this. And so that response was not included in the packet because it wasn't actually, it was more like a pitch deck, if you will, as opposed to the actual response to the RFI that was submitted. With that, I'll turn it back over to Mr. Watts.
Perfect. Thank you, Holly. So just to tag on and what Holly just presented, what we'll do next is we do want to articulate four areas, if you will, of what we want to establish if the RFI actually answered, and what we want to look at ongoing as we evaluate, look at this process. So one, we want to look at, did they mostly address the RFI as published? We also want to look at what stood out. So out of the 4 of them, what stood out, what was missing, and then any other general comments the team has in response to the 4 that were submitted. So what we can do now is open for general discussion on elements that should absolutely be considered, and moving forward in the procurement process and lessons learned from your own experiences with similar projects that you have been involved with. Is that any questions on that? All right, so we just open that up for discussion. Oh, go ahead.
Mr. Watts, I don't know, do you want me to pull them up on the screen and go response by response, or should I just take notes as you guys discuss? What is your preference? What's the will of the group?
Do we have any feedback? I'm okay with you bringing it up, but whatever the group wants to do. Opinions? Okay, go for it, Holly. Let's go with your idea. I like that.
I put them in the packet in alphabetical order. So what you should see on your screen now is the one from Blackbaud. So what I can do is, while it's up on the screen, and I know that we provided them to you earlier today, if we just want to take a moment just to kind of scroll through it, and hopefully you have your own packets, and then thinking of those questions that Mr. Watts asked, we'll just be, staff will just be taking notes behind the scene.
Can I ask you overall generalized question? Any of these folks work with any previous CSC groups in the
Yes. Yes, Web Author, which is the last one, works with a handful of the CSCs, not all of them, but a handful of them.
Okay.
And I guess I should also say that Web Author offers a discount to CSC. I'm just going to put it on the record. They do offer a discount to CSCs that are members of FACT, which is the Florida Alliance of Children's Councils and Trust. I think that I got that right in terms of what their acronym stands for. So that there is one might argue that there could be a benefit of partnering to be able to contribute to a larger body of work among CSCs.
And when I looked overall, Mr. Watts and Holly, when I looked at briefly, I have to admit briefly, the RFIs, the least on paper attractive one, right, that catches your eye is actually Web Author, but they're the ones that probably have the most experience doing what we need, in my initial reaction, right? You can tell that they've been down this road before. Whereas some of the other organizations like MTX, and I'm familiar with some of the things that they do A to Z, from education to prisons to healthcare. I mean, they can pretty much do it all. And so, which is fabulous, but that leans more towards custom development, that leads more towards kind of creating things from scratch. Whereas a Web Author, they can probably repurpose something that was created a few years ago. And I think there's some value there. And of course, they know our community, the discount that Holly mentioned. I'm not saying that's a final recommendation, but these are some of the initial thoughts that I received. And then with Unite Us, I will say with Unite Us, they have had a significant publicity push throughout communities across the state of Florida, trying to get their name out there and their brand out there. That doesn't mean their technology is what we need, but they have invested significantly in the community. So those are some initial thoughts that I thought of. And then the last thing I want to mention is when I think of $150,000, I think of one FTE contractor for about 6 months of work, right? And I'm not saying it's apples to apples, but just think about it that way from a contractual perspective. That isn't a lot of money, right? An MTX, for example, could run through that in a few weeks, in my opinion, or any real, any custom development shop. Whereas if you've got something that's a COTS or a custom, solution off the shelf, maybe the 150 will work, right? And then you have the other extreme, which Holly mentioned, where I think $1 million was thrown out there. And that's kind of the open-ended software development companies that they can create whatever you want, but it's hard to gauge the budget. And in the industry that we're in the space that we're in, we have those parameters that we have to stick by. So those are just some initial thoughts for the group.
Let me ask a question, and this may even be for Eddie. based on just what you just articulated. You know, let's say with this CSC that we have an idea of what direction we're trying to go in as it pertains to the software system. But as someone or as a group that's just starting out, that will very much evolve as information comes in or whatnot. So in establishing or trying to identify a group, you know, what angle would you per se look at to not just focus on right now what they're putting in front of us, but also how to kind of evaluate and make a decision of who might be able to grow?
That's a great question, Mr. Watts. That's a great question. And that's where I would ask some of the respondents about, you know, case studies or examples or stories of where they started off with, let's say, an XYZ organization, small budget, idea phase 1, phase 2, and what that looked like over a span of 5 years or over a span of 10 years. Because naturally we have to be nimble and adjust with current market conditions, situation when it comes to you know, leadership, education. And we may not be able to kind of, you know, do it all right in the beginning, and that's okay. And how does that evolution work? And do they have examples of that? Because I don't think what we want is we sign up with an organization, they deliver a product, and we don't see them again. I mean, this is truly a partnership and a relationship, and what they deliver day one may look totally different than what they will update software wise year 3. And a question for them is also going to be, are you investing in your software? Some organizations are small and they rely on organizations like the CSCs, for example, to fund their innovation and their progress and their technology roadmap. What we want is an organization, a partner that already has a roadmap, and they know what their software is going to look like in 2023, 2024, 2025. So as we get organized, as we continue to grow and move forward, we also know how this partner or this software is going to grow with us as well. And so I think that's extremely important. The last thing I want to mention is related to this topic. This is a great question. Is I'm not a fan of being a guinea pig, right? And we've got everyone in this group and others that are involved with the CSC have a ton of work to do and a lot of responsibilities. And what we don't want to do is become an IT shop or a software development company where we're constantly working. We want someone that can kind of take care of that and have that trust that we know while we're doing the good work on the streets of this community, there's a partner that is building the software, maintaining it, securing it, and also thinking about what we need in the future. And so these organizations, for the most part, based on what I've seen briefly, they've been around, and I'm sure they've got some really good success stories. And that's where it's great to pick up the phone and say, hey, you're a customer of MTX. You've been with them for 7 years. How has that journey been? We're in the beginning of the journey potentially. And what is that journey going to look like in year 5? Same thing with WebAuthor and Unitas and the others.
That's great. Do we have any other feedback? I thought I saw Marcus's screen light up one time.
Yeah, I'd like to kind of mirror some information that Eddie went through. Is you want to find an organization that's going to be kind of agile with you so that you don't have to implement this all in the first punch, right? You prioritize what you need up front to get you operational, and then you'll have your own internal roadmap to implement modules and features as you grow. And so you're going to want to have an organization that's going to work with you. And I would also support Eddie's comment that you don't want to be the guinea pig with something new. So some of these organizations, they'll go through, and I know Blackbaud, I don't know the other 3, but they'll come to you with what they call product feedback loops, and you'll get stuck in giving them feedback, and then they'll implement them and then ask if you'll test it, and then it becomes part of their marketing campaigns moving forward. And that's okay, depending on the complexity of what it is that you're asking to do. When I go through I see that most of them are identifying the modules and features and capabilities that they offer. I'm going to presume that these are tested. Again, I know Blackbaud. I don't know the other 3 intimately at all. but they're going through talking about features and capabilities, which is wonderful because that was what was in your RFI. I can't remember, Holly, in the RFI, did you include implementation methodology in the RFI? Did you go into like, how would you implement this in our organization?
Mr. Chair, I know we're on Zoom, but I'm going to assume that I can respond. No, not in depth. We didn't ask about that. The question that we asked about was more, can you scale it? Like at like what levels? I mean, there were some elements of that asked about, but it could be that we didn't ask the right question, to be perfectly honest.
Okay, because that's what I didn't necessarily see an implementation methodology in any of the responses. It may be buried in there, but they didn't necessarily stand it, because the way they implement and how they go is important to me, especially when I'm doing something new. So anyway, I think that those comments kind of support what Eddie was talking about earlier. So yeah, anyway, hope that's of value.
Yeah, I mean, Marcus hit the nail on the head there, and some additional things that he made me think of is, as this CSC is organizing and implementing processes and procedures, really exciting things. You suddenly are going to have a partner or a piece of software that is going to have some sort of workflow or processes and procedures. And what I always recommend to people, and some people say I'm a little hard-headed, just because you think you're going to do something as a group one way doesn't mean it has to be that way. And I always recommend folks to maybe listen to like the web author folks or the Blackbaud folks, or folks that have been doing this maybe longer than us, because they may have learned from a previous implementation that the billing process can be a little bit different. And so I always say requirements are important, RFIs or RFPs or ITNs are important, but when they are proposing something, trying to have an open mind, it could actually help. Just because they didn't answer the question 10 for 10 or 100% doesn't mean it's a bad answer, right? And so I think we have to look at it that way as well. Some of these companies have thousands of employees, and so they may have some really good lessons learned that they experience in another state or another municipality or another county. And I think it's also important for all of us to have an open mind. They may have some really good ideas that at first we may think are crazy, but guess what? Long term, maybe that's the route we want to go. So that's another piece of information, Mr. Watts, that I'd like to share.
I think that's great. One thing I heard that whole conversation is the word agile. And so I from previous experiences on this CSC and going through other, I have learned that you can have a vision for something, but those discussions may have to be agile, reevaluate to get the actual product that you were envisioning, but maybe we're going down. So I think that is absolutely great. And this is exactly the type of conversation that we want to have right now, because it's helping us inform how we move forward with the process. So does anyone else have any other feedback or experiences that they can provide, to the group, discuss to the group, that will likely, impact the direction? Okay, all right. So I think what we'll do next is, Holly, this is okay. What we'll do next is, I think with that conversation, I think we're in a good place to move towards our next discussion, which is work plan development. And so based on that discussion, let's think about some of our next steps moving forward that we should focus on to help, inform our scope of work for a future procurement, even down to what's reasonable for a timeline, recommendations for the procurement evaluation team, that whole process. And we'd want to come up with something with the intent that we be able to present this at a next council meeting, which I believe is March 24th. So thinking about the RFIs that we have in front of us, and some of the, what we focused on, which was what stood out, what was missing, other general comments, and some of the discussion that just came up. What do you guys think are some good ideas or directions moving forward? How do we move forward with this work group to then present, final recommendations and things to the council. Did anybody have any questions on that?
I mean, for me, Mr. Watts, I think I need a little bit more time to read the responses in a little bit more detail, just to be able to, write some comments down and maybe provide some feedback. I think we get it. I mean, they are RFIs. Some of it is boilerplate, template type responses, as we all know. But there can be some tidbits there, some key information that I don't think any of us want to miss. So personally, just speaking for me, I would need a few days to just spend a couple hours to print out the documents and go old school and start, writing some notes. That's just me.
Yeah. One thing that I would also go back to some of these organizations and see if you can get some business references and do some reference checks with customers of similar size and scope of what you're looking for. If you go, they should be able to provide that to you. And then, and what you're going to be interested in talking to their references about is, how did the implementation go? Was it successful? Did you have a successful adoption, right? And then what has support been like for them after go live, right? Have they been responsive? That kind of thing. So I would recommend, you're even at a point where you could do some reference checks with some of their customers.
Right, thank you for that. I couldn't remember whose hands went up first, so we'll go with Mr.
No, I kind of agree with what Eddie said as far as giving us a little bit more time to review the responses. And I'm not sure, I know everybody has a different process. Are we actually allowed to see the RFIs that went out so that we could compare it with the responses that came in?
I believe the answer to that, oh, go ahead, Holly.
So the answer to that is yes. And I just wanted to kind of clarify the process for this and to kind of echo the intent of between now and the next meeting for sure is to kind of have each of you look at those. But the RFI that was published, it's on our website, and I will absolutely make sure. In hindsight, I could have included in this packet. I'll do that. I'll have that follow up. And the response, and so if I think I understand the question that you're asking, is their responses to us is public, is open to the public. So the answer for our RFI is yes. The intent for developing the work plan is to kind of determine, yes, spend some time, read it, and how we're going to develop that actual scope of work. But to what Mr. Johnson said, using the time between now and then to maybe do some reference checks with these particular companies. Just because they submitted a response to the RFI doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to respond to the ITN that we do. And it also doesn't preclude any other companies from doing it. So what I hear is, maybe for those who did take the time to develop a response, go ahead and just meet with them. And we have just, full disclosure, our intent is to meet with each of them or offer an opportunity to meet one-on-one with each of them up to 2 times to get a look at it. But we hadn't thought about asking the question for, hey, can you provide us with some references? But to Mr. Tostin's point, there have been, based on those references, could we maybe see a procurement that was published by maybe another local government, another CSC, and ask if they're outside of that window, could we see those responses that were submitted? I do believe that once that procurement window, especially with local governments, once that procurement window closes, all of those submissions, unless there's some trade secret stuff, should be open to the public. So that's absolutely something that we can build into the work plan. And it's these types of suggestions on how do we develop that scope of work and through this process over the next kind of 5 weeks. What are those key steps that we need to do is really the goal of today's meeting. Does that answer your question, Mr. Tostin?
All right, great. So Holly, I have a question for you. So how would you propose that we, as far as our next step, so giving them an opportunity to further dive into the current 4 submitted RFIs, and then also you'll send out, I know it's posted, but you can send out, okay. So what would be your suggestion as far as next steps for another meeting before 24.
So we have time on your calendar on the 22nd. And so the idea is, what information do you guys, does the work group need between now and then to be able to start, like, what, putting together, if you will, maybe an outline for the scope of work? And I think that that's where Mr. Gonzalez was saying, I want to really read through these a little bit more before we can start putting down on paper what a scope of work might include. So I definitely hear that for our work plan. At our next meeting, we want to be able to do that, but that means time with those responses. What other information would you need before we could really start developing that outline? I think that's what we'd like to identify today. So that's the first thing. The second thing that we'd really like to identify, especially learning from those who have done anything like this before, a reality check on implementation of what a project this scale could look like. I mean, is this a 6-month project that we're so when we start thinking about the development of the scope of work, are we going to tell a potential vendor, we want you to be up and running in 3 weeks? I mean, clearly not. So really, this is a harvesting of your knowledge and experience of systems like this, of system development. And then finally, that third thing is, and we don't necessarily have to get to that today, we could do that at a subsequent meeting, is when we do publish the procurement, do you have recommendations for who might serve on that type of evaluation committee? That will be like the third objective, but laying out in our timeline all the things that you need between now and our next meeting on the 22nd, so that we could develop the scope of work, what that timeline for an actual scope of work might look like, and then those recommendations. That's what I hope to come out, especially those first two today.
Let me ask this question for the group. What do you think would be a more reasonable amount of time to review the current 4 that we have in front of us today?
I would probably, this is once again just Eddie speaking here. I'd probably pick one a day, right? So I'd probably do one tomorrow, one Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. So something around, Mr. Watts, something around Wednesday. That's just me. Everyone on this phone call is extremely busy in the weekends here. And I know some people have spring break and stuff like that. So a week is my recommendation, but I'm just one person in the group.
Okay. And let me ask this question. So let's say, and Holly, you chime in. So let's say if we gave an additional 5 days as a goal, but even would we have the expectation, some of these notes that we possibly have, would it be an option for us to send those electronically to you? And okay. Well, let's see. Maybe we should just go ahead and discuss that. So you guys want an additional 5 days, or you guys thinking that time frame? Holly, Sika, that's not good. What are you thinking? What is the group thinking?
Hey, so first of all, greetings everybody. I have not met everyone, but I'm Sika Rose Green, the Executive Director of CSC Leon. Let me say this. First of all, we thank you for being willing to serve on this committee for us, because this is a huge deal, and we want to be very deliberate about how we formulate that RFP or ITN, so that we are asking for the right information to elicit the right information from those who will respond, so that we can make a very good decision with all of the clues that we get. So that's number one. Number two, I just literally sent a quick message to Holly that hearing the discussion and the desire for you all to dive more into the RFI responses we got, I am questioning whether we can or even should have something prepared for our next council meeting, which is March 24th. Holly?
I just want to be clear. It wasn't the intention. We're just trying to develop the work plan. So I think I just want to be super clear. There wasn't an expectation that you had reviewed these prior, like in depth prior to today. So I just wanted to be super clear about that. Our next meeting is on the 22nd to help kind of further that discussion. All that we're planning to present to our council is just the work plan of what are the things we're going to accomplish in the timeline. I just wanted to be clear on that. So that we didn't feel like we were behind like we were behind schedule.
And thank you. So with that, I think, and as a mother of 3 myself, I know spring break next week, people are going to need some mental breaks. If you got kids, nieces, nephews, whatever it is, children you mentor, whatever that is. So I think to allow at least another week to be able to look through the responses to the RFI that we've gotten. And then on the 22nd, just be prepared to get a good draft of the work plan. And then we are able to talk about that a little bit at our council meeting on the 24th. Does that sound reasonable? Because we know you are busy beyond measure. And these proposals, I think when Eddie said it, if I may call you Eddie, maybe taking one a day is about all that's gonna happen. And with spring break coming, if it were me, I'd take me a couple days in between. So how does that sound, Chair Watts? What are you thinking with that suggestion?
I'm completely fine and flexible. So if that works for the group, I think it's a solid plan. We take the additional week. Let me ask this question. In between that time, if someone is, let's say, done with MTX and they formulated some notes and they not have to, but if they want to send that information ahead of time, it is possible that if Holly or whomever receives it all, we might even have that information presented to us before the March 22nd and have a chance to review that possibly as well. Okay. So what is the—
Absolutely.
Okay.
So one I suggest, oh, sorry, Mr. Chair, if I may, one suggestion for our work plan could be, would the members of the committee prefer tools like so that they could maybe evaluate the responses and even though they're not technically responses, just to see like what pointed out, would that be helpful that maybe it's sent over to you guys in like a survey format as you're going through them between now and like the next week that you could respond to in that way so that we're kind of formally documenting? Do you want to go down that route, or would you prefer to just say, I'm reading through them, here are my thoughts on them of things that you should absolutely make sure you ask about in a potential market research interview with the vendor, so that because ultimately we're in this phase of gathering information of what we should include in our scope of work. So what are the steps that we need to put in place to get as much information so that you feel comfortable developing that scope of work? So I definitely hear you that when we come back together, we can spend a little bit more time on developing that. But I really want to hear today from you guys, what additional information would be helpful? Or again, with your process and having developed these systems before, what are the things we're not thinking about that we need to make sure that we do before we develop that scope of work? And then when I say the scope of work, I'm talking about the actual scope of work for the ITN, not the work plan that's going to govern this work group. Does that make sense?
Holly, I really appreciate that. Mr. Johnson, I saw you light up. I'm going to let you go ahead. Okay. My personal opinion, having the experience of going through something similar to this, I think a combination of both of those things would be helpful if you did provide a guide of what to look like. And then also just hearing Mr. Johnson and Eddie's discussion earlier, your guide may have things on there that you didn't think about that was not thought about. And that might need to be included. So I think a combination of the two, I think it would be helpful for me, it has been in the past, just to even help guide, and then have additional. I think that would be great. That's my opinion. I don't know how anybody else feels.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I'd agree with that. I think that a checklist, Holly, that you would help me kind of better understand your priorities, right? And The other thing is that I think it was Darren had mentioned earlier about it would be nice to see the RFI that went out. So that your RFI that went out will also help us measure how well the RFI responses match to your RFI. So, and then other than that, my style is also a little bit informal. I like to dig in. I'll even research the company's website, you know, and then between the a checklist type document and then the RFI, then as I go through it, I'll know some things that weren't covered in the RFI are not covered in your checklist that I can then add at the bottom as some additional items of consideration. That's kind of my style. I don't know how well that meshes with the others, but that would be my suggestion, Mr. Chair.
You have any other feedback from the members? All right, so I don't think that requires a vote. That was a joke. So, all right, do we, if we don't have anything else, I'll move on to the next agenda. Holly, anything else? Yes, go for it.
Could you, again, I'm going to ask for those that have been in this space of developing a system like this or seen others, can we talk a little bit about implementation time? I feel that while we did ask I want to not consider the vendors at all and just have a conversation, not thinking about who responded to the RFI, right? We have that information. That's great. I'd love to just document the experience of those that have been involved with these systems, around these systems, of let's just press pause on the RFI for a moment, like of what we have, and talk about your experience so that when we're thinking about developing that scope of work. And Mr. Johnson, you shared that you are in the midst of this right now. What have been some of those kind of lessons that you've learned, especially thinking about implementation timelines? Is if you can frame it in that way, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, I think you're going to find varying opinions on this one, I suspect. There's so many factors that are unknown to understand what your timeline would be. Like, what are your priorities? What would you like to see in year one? You know, and then what is acceptable in year two? For example, we talked about phases and being agile and deploying things out. The other thing is, how complex do you need your system to be? What kind of workflows, what kind of reporting, you know? And I think you had mentioned that you're trying to go as out of the box as possible with little customization. So that really helps. And the organization is small. You don't have a big user base yet. So what's the availability to do user acceptance testing and working with the vendor on some of the design as you're implementing, right? So that that's tough to answer because I don't know that I fully understand what your top priorities and goals are out the door. So that's a tough one to answer.
Yeah, so if I can jump in, Mr. Chair, I don't know that we know either. Everything is still very, very new. And I mean that so sincerely. So you're right on the money. We will not have that many users first. I think our RFI asked about the possibility of something being up and running for an expedited funding cycle. I think what I realize, even if I haven't communicated that to Holly or Jacinta yet, we will probably be monitoring that via Excel spreadsheets. That's probably what we're going to be doing, and that is absolutely okay. I think there even is still a CSC that is using Excel spreadsheets to manage the money that they are investing. So I am not an IT specialist and I don't play one on TV, but what I know, and Marcus and I have worked together before, for full disclosure. So Marcus knows that I am an early adopter. If it is something new and could make things easier, I'm always like, give it to me. Let me see if I can make it work. So that is kind of who I am when it comes to this space. That being said, what I believe will probably happen is we will look at these, we will ask them for an implementation time. I don't know that we can say, oh, we want this by December. I am very skittish about that because I want to manage expectations for what can and should and will happen. So I kind of feel like that once we issue this ITN or this RFP, we will ask them for their best timeline, considering what we put as the priorities in that RFP or ITN, and then use that understanding that you can give the timelines you want. You never know when those bugs are going to happen, and it move forward. The other thing that I fully expect is that once whatever it is implemented and we start working in it, that is when we're going to know, oh, wow, we really needed to do this. Oh, wow, we really needed to do that. So I think we are understand that this is going to be an iterative process, because a lot of times you don't know what you don't want until you get, or you know what you don't want once you kind of started moving along with it. And I don't know that we have the answers to the questions that would inform you saying, oh yeah, this thing usually takes 8 weeks. This thing usually takes 10 weeks. We're not talking about Microsoft 365 where you can upload it and then it moves the way that you're supposed to move it, even though we are looking to possibly get something off the shelf. So I don't know if what I said helps at all. I think knowing Holly the way that I do, it's good to have some concept of what we would be looking at as far as an implementation. I have come off of that a lot in my life and just said, okay, we're just going to work on it until we kind of get where we need to be, especially because we understand what kind of money constraints we're under and how far we're willing to go in this first year with that money. So I hope that makes sense from a non-IT person.
Thank you, Sika. And Darren, I think I saw your screen light up, and Marcus. Did y'all have anything?
I was just going to kind of echo on what Mr. Johnson said with regards to it's kind of hard to answer that question without knowing the number of different variables that are involved. Most of the things that he kind of spoke on. But again, to what Sika just said, I mean, as long as you build into that agreement or whatnot, a time frame in which you have, I guess you could say, like post-deployment items in which can be dealt with, because like you said, once you go live with this, then you'll start thinking, okay, well, this is also something that we need to start thinking about, things that you didn't think about during this process. Those, as long as those are built into your agreement, then you can adjust. So.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better than Darren. I mean, what is the day that the first person, Sika, or the appropriate person logs in? And the moment she logs in, there's going to be other things that, are going to come up. And this is going to be a journey. We know we have a budget to work with, and that's usually a variable that comes into this. But what Sika said is absolutely correct. And I think we've all been part of projects that had a hard deadline. And someone in the middle of the night decided to pick a hard deadline, and it's really deflating. And when you look back, you realize that wasn't necessary, right? Maybe there were some external pressures that forced us to pick December 15th, but could it have been January 15th? And if we don't hit December 15th, it's deflating to the team, it's deflating to the partner. And so I think having that flexibility and then setting expectations, as was mentioned earlier, with the different stakeholders and constituents, I think is important. And so it's exciting, it's risky, but based on what I've seen over the last hour, this is an amazing group.
Thanks, Eddie. And so, yes, Holly.
So I, based on the feedback that you've provided, I have devised the start of a work plan. And I really love what Mr. Johnson said, that it shouldn't be timeline based, but part of our work plan is that we need to prioritize our phase goals. I really loved how you said that. What would you like to see in year 1, year 2? I've also written down that part of that work plan request references from those vendors who did provide a response to the RFI, and to host those demos so that we can really look at that user experience. That's what I just heard from Mr. Gonzalez, that once you log into a system, you start thinking about things the other way. And so potentially to incorporate all of that into the development of this work plan so that we can have a scope of work that we can start working on. In addition to that, we will, of course, distribute the responses again along with the RFI and develop that checklist and included just a link to the websites for those vendors who did respond. And we'll include on that checklist what items were listed. We'll get that distributed to you guys by the end of this week, with the idea of giving you all of next week to kind of review, respond, and submit those back to us so that we can kind of compile for our meeting on the 22nd, going to Sika's point on the 22nd to really kind of maybe start to potentially outline a scope of work, maybe, but not to rush it. That if we need more time, or that if we really need to spend time with the council to prioritize phase goals, then that's the part that we need to do first. So I want to say thank you for everything that you've contributed thus far. And my only question that I would ask, and I might call on Corey, I know her camera's not on, I hope that that's okay, or I don't know if she had to drop off or not, but any experience about part of this work plan engaging community members? Everything that we've talked about thus far has been talking to vendors, potentially talking to references, but I'm curious for input if in our work plan we should intentionally talk to some of our maybe potential investment partners for feedback of other systems have worked, have not worked, document that, et cetera. So I wanted to ask for feedback on that particular item.
Let me ask a possible ignorant question. I know that some of the group members have asked for even a scope of what we are possible, okay, to even help inform what a timeline might look like. Okay. And I know that CSC has a broad idea of what they would like to get out of this system would the needs assessment possibly impact some of that scope as well? And if so, would we have any of the information? Okay, go ahead.
I'll go. I don't know if Holly was getting ready to.
I'm really sorry. I have to go.
We got it.
I'm so sorry. Thank you so much.
No.
Okay.
We got it, Holly.
Bye.
Bye. So Jacinta and I are hosts, so we're fine. Okay, Corey's coming back in. There we go. So to answer that question, I think the needs assessment is going to inform a whole lot of what we do. We do expect to get the first pieces of that, as you know, Mr. Chair, next month. And so we can look at what that recommended expedited funding will look like. And then, of course, in June is when we will get the rest of it and kind of look at what the council's priorities will be moving into the fall. So I think that the needs assessment could easily provide some sort of insight into what we should ask in the scope of service for the RFP. And there was one more thing. Oh, and then the other piece is, it is the desire of the council to look at a system that could easily be used by our investment partners, right? So they would put information directly into that system. And so with that, it probably would be an awesome idea to include them in whatever reviews of the system that we end up choosing, or during that process that we are getting demos or whatever that is. We have tried to be very deliberate about including every stakeholder in the processes that we've done. So needs assessment, all of that, community conversations. So we've already started that journey and ensuring that we try to get all the voices at the table. So I don't know that we thought about it before, but I do think we need to ensure that possible investment partners are a part of any kind of evaluation piece or testing piece that we do with any companies that are either planning to submit. Maybe it's during the time that we're evaluating these 4 that did submit. If we ask for demos, we pull some of that investment provider community in to use some of the stuff so they can tell us, yeah, this is wonderful, or this is too cumbersome, we can't understand it.
All right, thank you. We have any other feedback or comments? And let's say that after this call, something comes up and you do have something that you didn't think about that you want to address, it is okay to respond back, and we can get that addressed. Just remember, it's under the sunshine. So, okay, I'm gonna go on to our next topic if we don't have anything else. Right, okay. So next we'll discuss next meeting date, which will be March 22nd. We all think have this on our schedules, March 22nd, 1 p.m. Zoom. And then the next one is set for April 6th at 12 p.m. And so prior to that time, I'll do a quick recap. We're going to have, Holly's going to send us, or Sika's team is going to send us the actual response, all the responses. We'll take the next week or so to review the current RFIs that are in front of us. We'll have a checklist sent to us, guiding document, if you will, of possibly what we think we're looking for, with you guys to then also give your expertise of what is not on that list that we might need to focus on. So we'll have that out to us as well. If you have any feedback that is ready between now and the next meeting, it is okay to send that feedback into Holly. And it is possible that if everyone has it in, we would be able to compile that information, send it out to all of us before the next meeting. So did I miss anything? Did I miss anything? I think, okay. So.
And just know that the next meeting will be talking about the work plan.
Okay.
But if by chance you get all that feedback in, we might be able to have that discussion as well. But I don't want you guys pushing yourselves or rushing.
Okay, thank you for that. So next meeting agenda, I pretty much just talked about that. And so make my little list here. Okay, do any of the members have any closing thoughts?
Mr. Chair, I don't know, I can't find the hand raised on there. I will probably not attend the 22nd, the meeting on the 22nd. I do have a conflict that I cannot change. So I just want to make the group aware that I will most likely not attend that meeting on the 22nd, but I will make sure to provide any comments and feedback and materials to Holly before then.
And Mr. Chair, this is Eddie. There's actually a technology conference on the 23rd of March. It's focused on really, talent pipeline management, work development, education. And so one of the goals of that conference is to get all of the local technology companies in one room. I don't know if any of the current respondents will be in attendance, but I will tell you there'll be over 150 people there. And so I'll make sure I work with Holly to share that information. It's free, it's at FSU, but we're talking about technology. We're talking about potentially keeping it in our community. That could be a good place for us to go and just listen to see what's out there. And there's an education component. So I'll make sure I share that with Holly.
I would really appreciate that as well. Thank you.
Yeah.
Do we have any other member comments? Nothing else? Okay, well, with that, we are adjourned.